Good afternoon. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so excited to be here with all of you this weekend as part of the larger weekend of action to stop Cop City. Charis and the Weelaunee Coalition present an inspirational discussion with the three founding members of the Weelaunee Coalition as they share their efforts to grow community power to stop Cop City while amplifying the voices of young children. The Weelaunee Coalition is a multiracial, intergenerational group of educators, students, families, and neighbors organizing to stop Cop City and protect the Weelaunee Forest, the South River Forest. They ground their organizing in principles of radical solidarity with Black, Brown, and Indigenous liberation struggles. They use cultural organizing and education to build power with children, families, and neighbors of the forest, to grow their relationship with the Weelaunee Forest and each other, and to create a world liberated from environmental and racial injustice and violence. Rakia Rogers, the founder of the Highlander School, an early childhood learning community in East Atlanta that honors children's relationships, their kinship with the earth, land, and community, is joined by Sasha Von Hanna, parent whose child is an alum of the Highlander School and whose parenting for social justice continues as she experiments with unschooling, as well as Linda Grant, a senior lecturer in early childhood education at a state university, who will provide the science, in quotes, which supports why grounding children in meaningful work as change agents can impact learning and development in many positive ways. All of this work is very much in line with Charis's theory of social change, which is that when we nurture and support the full wellness of children, their curiosity, their intellect, and their heart, we grow better communities and a better world. So we're very honored to be here with all of you at a time when our hearts are breaking in lots of different directions. And so this work feels more important than ever to me. So it is a real honor to be here with all of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Rakia Rogers. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody give a hand real quick.
Yeah, let me push this back just a little bit. Is that okay, ER? A little bit. It's a real honor to be here today with my colleagues and in community with you all as part of the week of action to stop Cop City. And as we begin our time together and in conversation, I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are sitting on the ancestral land of the Muskogee people, that this was the land where Muskogee culture thrived, where Muskogee families lived, loved, and played. It is also the land that bore witness to their violent displacement. We honor them here today, not only as part of our past, but very much as part of our present, continuing to fight for this land and in solidarity with us to stop Cop City. We also want to acknowledge that this is the land that bore witness to enslaved Africans, that this was a land that also witnessed their families that thrived, the culture that thrived, families that lived and loved and had a deep connection with this land as well. And that both of these groups of people continue to stand in resistance together, and we stand in solidarity with them. It seems like such a relevant conversation as we bear witness to continued displacement of people, to continued militarization. It seems as though we haven't quite found what it means to have a reimagined world. So as we begin our conversation together, I almost want you to think of this as having a conversation with aunties or friends. I hate standing in front of people and talking and lecturing. So if any moment during the discussion you have something you want to say or clarifying question, please raise your hand. ER will bring the mic to you. And so we can think of this more of an exchange of ideals, not us just sitting up here and lecturing y'all, if that works. Again, beautiful introduction. My name is Rakia, founder of the Highlander School. And this is an inspiring photograph for me because I often get to sit with when I walk into school every day of what it means to live and the possibilities of a reimagined world. If you were to ask children in our school, they would tell you everyone has a right to water. Everyone has a right to food and shelter. Everyone has the right for their bodies not to be harmed, and they have an expansive view of community and who has a right to that. It's not just for me or you or those who live inside their homes. It's for the ants The rats, yes, the rats. They had to convince me, but yes, the rats. It's for the trees, it's for all that embodies a sense of community. As a foundation of our school, we are inspired by the educators of Reggio Emilia, the Black Panthers, many, many others. Educators in Reggio Emilia built their pedagogy after World War II and was anti-fascist in its own, thinking and so forth. So we have this foundation as a school, but yet there was a wrestling in terms of our work of how do we nurture and empower children to be activists and co-conspirators. I would say that the work really begins with the internal revolution. I had to rethink my role as a teacher, as an educator, that we have to rethink our roles in the lives of children as adults and really connect the fact that as much as we talk about abolition of work and connection to police, that often educators and teachers uphold the systems of oppression. So this question of what is the purpose of education? What are your thoughts?
You said what's the purpose?
What is the purpose of education?
For me, I think as an educator, it's to sort of guide children more towards where their interests align, because I think they're curious and they're gonna learn regardless, and so it's just your job to like guide them.
Guide them. Beautiful. We're paying attention to children's interests. We're here to guide them. This is the right setting. And what we also know about the purpose of education has been institutionally for children to become workers. Developed at the turn of the century, factory owners needed for folks to have basic skills. And so that was the intent. Our schedule, our day, our practices, our environments, almost everything about what we've done as a field has been in connection with oppression and children growing into becoming workers. And so when I offer this up of really the revolution beginning internally is then I have to shift my image of the child and my work in relationship to them. What does that mean? And part of that is listening to in a deep, deep way to young children. Children have already informed us of their expansive points of views in terms of community. But as you see this image, the ways in which children come into this world seeking connection with their world, connection with their environment, that we never come into this world as individuals. Individualism is a lie. We are always connected. And they constantly see that. So noticing that in our relationships with children, being able to offer that and create environments that support those relationships and connections, really empathy, as far as I'm concerned, is the root of social justice and the ways in which we do that. So even if another child falls on the playground, we'll say to the other children, oh my goodness, so-and-so has fallen, they're crying, we need to go help them. You can't talk about expansive big issues if you're not helping children to see every single day the way we show up for each other in the community. So-and-so doesn't have their lovey. They're sad. How do we support that? And children innately have that. I would argue that through capitalism and grind and the oppressive systems, we teach it out of them. We create hallways that are like prisons in our public schools. We tell them to be quiet. We tell them you have to eat so fast. We create all these rules and regulations that actually teach their own internal connections that they once had with themselves. So we have to be and create the social and emotional environment for children to thrive. And I'm going to ask you to go next, ER. So this is an image of, I love this because this is Sasha's daughter. And one of the huge parts of our program is children's connection with this earth. And when we first got started, we had a garden and so forth, but then through a really deeper listening to children, again, learning from them, and in essence, learning the possibilities of what it means to be a human. The children would say this garden, again, is for everyone. It's for the ladybugs and the caterpillars. We spend a lot of time trying to keep the bugs out. And it's a negotiation because sometimes it will destroy it. So you have to negotiate to the point where our children in their walks, noticing that members of our community were unhoused, would say that's not fair. And we would have conversations about that. So you notice we're supporting the children's empathy within their walls, classrooms, but then expanding that to what it means to show up for your community outside those walls. To the point where the children said, we want to offer some food to members of our community who are unhoused. Now, again, us as adults, our work was when we would walk in our community, we would make a point not to pull children close to us. We would make a point to be in conversations because children feel your energy. But to the point where they actually were like writing a letter to the mayor. They wanted to feed those within the community. The teachers had said, you can't, you have to have a special permit. And the children said, that's an unfair law. And one child said, let's not listen to it, right? And so another child who happened to be a young Black boy was like, no, 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 the police will get you, right? They're young, they're already noticing things. And so the teacher said, well, what kind of law should we have? And the children said, love. It took me a while to really think about what the children were saying. I want us to think about that. Imagine that we had agreements as a community where love was the root of how we interacted and built community together. That for me was powerful. So in this moment, you can see the children's connectivity and to the earth. We interviewed members of our community, which included the librarian, it concluded a firefighter, and then the children said, but y'all didn't interview the trees. And we thought to ourselves, it never occurred to us to interview the trees. But again, children showing us a way in which community is expansive from their point of view. So in this next slide, you can kind of see these are a group of children right after the uprising, after we witnessed the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. These group of children are selecting which drawing of Breonna Taylor they want to offer for a mural. This was almost a year-long project that we were engaged in. So in holding a strong image of children and supporting and empowering them to be activists and co-conspirators also means that we're going to have what I would consider brave conversations. And I say for adults, because children can obviously and fluently have these conversations. And I think Sasha, Linda would agree with that. And so we saw our children out marching 2020. We had been closed for 2 months, weren't really sure what was going to happen. And when we first came back to the school and space, we wanted to help them make meaning of what was happening. We asked them, why were you guys protesting? What was happening? They didn't quite have the language. They were like, Black Lives Matter. Hands up, don't shoot. And so we made a decision, again, writing a letter and in community with our families, that we were going to offer more information. And we talked about the police hurt Breonna Taylor's body, the police hurt George Floyd's body, and they went back to nature. That's the term that they often use for death. And so here we were having conversations, and people will tell you, you shouldn't have these conversations with young children. Children should have a place of comfort and so forth. Let me be clear, we're not a child-centered program. It is a negotiation between the adult and the child. And this notion of children and innocence, I believe, is rooted in white supremacy. That we want to protect the innocence of white children, so we're not having these conversations. And we see it throughout the country. Many of our colleagues have gotten in trouble because they're reading books that are now deemed to be inappropriate under the guise of protecting children. We want to protect children from certain folks reading books. But again, this is really deeply rooted in white supremacy. So in our school, in our space, nothing is off the table. Anything can be discussed, whether it's a pregnancy, a war, and so forth. As educators, as families, we come together, we collaborate, we develop means in which not to cause additional harm and to have them in ways that are developmentally appropriate. So if we want to empower children, we have to recognize their ability to navigate really difficult conversations. That is us as adults who have difficulty navigating conversations about race and war and so forth. So these children for over a year talked about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We put their images in our classrooms because we wanted them to see them as part of our greater community. The children then talked about the things that they wanted to give them. I remember Cristiano saying, I wish I could give George Floyd all my dinosaurs. That really stuck with me because Cristiano loved dinosaurs. So not only were the children willing to share, but they were willing to give the things that they loved the most to members of their community. And so, and in this period, we had lost a lot of our children of color, a lot of our Black children. And again, I would say for those who are working with white children or families, it is especially important that these conversations happen with white children, because there's a level of fluency that often happens in Black and brown households that's not happening within our communities with white children. So if we can go to the next slide, you can see these are the children selecting what images that they want to have. And this is a snippet of the final piece. The children decided that they wanted an image of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd to be holding hands underneath the rainbow. And it's a part of our community. It's on our back playscape. And the older children tell the younger children, let me tell you the story of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I'm not going to cry as I'm telling that story, because it's so important for me that we amplify the voices of children and the ways in which they said we wanted them to know that they were loved. Remember, that was the law that they wanted to have. So again, thinking the ways we want to nurture and we want to empower young children for a reimagined world, which meant we knew we could have conversations around Stop Cop City. And so that connection, not only what's happening with their families and their classrooms, their care for their immediate location, but what's happening in the greater community was so important to them. And as you can see in the next slide, really the pivotal moment for that was the invitation from Sasha and for Linda to go to a stomp being led by Miko Shaban. It's like 2 years now, November of 2021, where we came together as a whole community and witnessed the Muskogee stomped, which was really powerful for us to see the children from Morgan Oliver, to see us again. And Miko Shaban said so eloquently, I want people to know that the Muskogee are still here fighting for land, water, and earth. He even said out loud, I wonder if these trees have ever heard the Muskogee language. I knew I had never heard the Muskogee language, and here we were. So immediately we went back and we thought, okay, how are we going to bring this to the children? How are we going to have conversations with the children? So one of the things that's really important for us in terms of our planning is this collaborations, adults having conversation. There isn't this immediate, hey y'all, there's Stop Cop City and blah, blah, blah. You're like, well, there's three. And we recognize that the planning is important for us to take place. So in our conversations with the families, we have a social justice committee. We decided to just start experiencing the Weelaunee Forest. We knew that they had a strong sense of community in a more than human world. What if on a regular basis, we took them to the forest? And so we began those trips to experience her and to really love her, I would say. The children planted trees, they had a garden, they played Ring Around the Rosie, they rolled around. Like I could tell you all these elaborate things that they did, but just children experienced the world with their full bodies, the pine cones, the pine needles, the air, everything like that. And even we would go once a month, and even outside of that, many of the other families would go at other times and so forth. And so as you can see, even in the next slide, they had and developed a real connection to a mother tree that was there, going to her many, many times, wrapping their arms, and again, building a strong connection. While this was happening, simultaneously, there was the Muskogee Summit that was being planned. And I would say it was almost like, I think, the birth of the Weelaunee Coalition in like a formal way, because we were initially asked to handle logistics, which was a porta potty. I would like to tell you we were asked to do something profound, but it was like, we were like, actually, that is quite profound. And so we knew we couldn't do it alone. So I called Sasha, Linda. We'd had these like decades conversations. We were calling in the Morgan Oliver School, Grant Park Cooperative Preschool, the Nest Nursery, other preschools to come together, join us in these visits, but also to help plan this Muskogee Summit. And that was extremely powerful as we handled logistics. food, other different things to welcome the return of the Muskogee people. But also, we began our more formalized conversations that we were having at the time. I think what's really powerful was we had the forest defenders who were in the forest, and for their own protection, many times their faces were covered. And so part of the early discussions we had was, how do we, as part of this movement, kind of operate as more of the above ground events and activities? Because at this point, there was this narrative of these white outside agitators. And so we wanted to counter that we were also families opposed to Cop City. We were children, we were educators, we were nurses, we were just people living our everyday lives. So that was really the birth of what I would say was a Weelaunee Coalition. So then we had these experiences with the Weelaunee Forest, and we had to have a really hard conversation about the Muskogee returning. We started this conversation with the land acknowledgement of the Muskogee and talking about connections that we even see what's happening in Gaza. Such a relevant thing of how to even have these conversations. And children wanted to know, well, where did they go? Why did they leave? What happened to them? And again, no conversation is off the table. We believe children have a right to truth, and truth is love. And so we told them. They were removed from the land. They did not want to leave. The children asked why. We talked about the resources that were on the land that were desired, cash crops, lots of conversations that needed to be taking place for children to understand. So when the children, this is Dr. Laura Harjo, we took images of all the Muskogee who were coming to the summit and put them as part of our environment, and the children made gifts for them, was a real celebration. And the children would take the images and play with them. And so in terms of like celebrating their return. And again, thinking today of what we're bearing witness to, that, yeah, this is a really important and relevant conversation that we need to be having continuously and so forth. So the children were making gifts, but then we decided at some point we need to tell them the full story of the Muskogee coming, and also what was the plan for this land. And so we told them about Cop City and the removal of the trees and what was going to happen and what Cop City was and so forth in terms of weapons. And the children were heartbroken. I don't have quite the proper way to expound the ways in which they placed their hands on their heart and said, do the people know? Do the people know? And that was really heartbreaking, because in their mind, they kept thinking, if people know, surely they would stop this. Surely they wouldn't allow this to take place. And so we said, how can we tell the people? They said, we need to write it down. We need to shout it. We need to yell it. So their ideals, and we take the ideals of children very seriously. It's not just cute. These are information with depth and connections to our ancestors. So we again planned ways. We gave them materials to write what they want to say. They were, again, you could see this banner. They said, I love you, trees. So it was a message to the trees. They were speaking to the trees. And then there was also a message to those who were going to harm the trees. Stop, never cut down the trees. The first banners that they made, and the children thought really intensely, you can't be something too heavy, you'll hurt the branches. It can't be this because it may hurt the tree stump. And so the first times we went in there, we just went in there, they said to protect it. But then these became part of us planning a rally with the children. We asked them, should we invite other people to shout it, to yell it? They said yes. They began to write letters. They delivered letters to other schools and so forth. So again, we're building community with children and amplifying their voices and so forth. Thank you, my friend. And so this was the children, and I think we'll have to press it one more time, practicing for the rallies. Oh, if you go back, let me see. There's a small video. It's a
Where's
small
the video, just on that slide.
Mhm. But if it didn't make it, I can talk about it. If you go to our, that was a video. If you go to the Highlander School's IG account, you'll see a video of the children practicing for the rallies. They made up signs. And so you'll often hear us sing this chant, don't, don't cut down the trees. That actually came from the children, and the signs came from the children. They practiced, they gave their reasoning of why. They talked about we needed trees for oxygen. This is why it was so important and so forth. So I really suggest following up with that video. But then this is the children also writing to other folks. They wrote to other preschools. They wrote to schools in San Francisco. They wrote to schools in Washington State. There were schools in California that were also simultaneously having rallies and so forth. This is the power of children and the power of us listening to the voices of children and building community. So kids who in San Francisco didn't necessarily know about the Weelaunee Forest, but now they knew about it and were again amplifying and causing ruckus, which I'm all about disrupting, because that is really the point. Really, if we talk about how do we empower and nurture children, we have to make a decision as adults, as educators, that we are not going to support an oppressive system, that we are going to disrupt by any means necessary and developmentally appropriate. The kids didn't know how to make like Molotov cocktails or anything like that. Like, I don't know, people have this imagery, but that we are going to disrupt in many ways possible. And even something as simple as them being able to communicate to other people, look what's happening in our city, they're cutting down our trees and so forth. So this is one of the many, many images, and I love it so much. This is Sasha, this is Violet, who's over here. And one of the reasons why I love this image is because we took over the street, right? We met at Brownwood Park. We started marching. This was Kay, who's one of our founding members. We made a decision to kind of take over Glenwood Avenue with these children. Can you imagine just being like, bump it? And I think we were like one of the few ones, even the other week of actions, that was able to take over the streets. And this group didn't represent the Highlander School. This was children and families and community with each other. These were children from the Morgan Oliver School. Again, forest defenders who came down and was like, yeah, this is dope. We had drummers. This was a powerful moment and created such synergy for us as a community to bear witness. And I wish I had more photographs and so forth, but there we were together. And in
our first one.
It was definitely our first one, and the first one of a lot more. And then the children eventually took the mics. They were chanting Black Lives Matter, because it was really important that the conversation for them was very much around saving the trees, but also it is also the role of the adult to be a provocateur, to provoke their thinking and help them see and make connections between not only was this harming the land and community, but people in many different ways. So for our older children, even more so, especially at Morgan Oliver, we're able to talk about that in a deep way. So I'm thinking about that in terms of the work. One of the things that has been really inspiring to me in this work has been working with Sasha, who was a former parent. I still we're still, there's no children. I gotta keep my mouth clean. We're still messing up stuff in the world. We're still doing things. And being in a space where I got to witness and be part and partner with you and Justin in raising Violet and see her as a very young child, fierce. And knowing that us as educators, very often we want to stomp that fierceness out of children. We want them to conform. And her teachers, like it wasn't me, were really adamant that we wanted her to have materials of clay and paper and wire for expression. And we wanted to create this space where she could be her fierce, the embodiment of her fierce, and her mama's fierce. And that is something for us to really consider. When a toddler is telling you no and they're pushing back, sometimes we're like, ugh, I love it. I love it, because that's that child that's going to stand up for you. Now, we don't want children to be like obnoxious. We believe in collective responsibility. There's a negotiation, but also we can say, I see how you're feeling. I can see your perspective, but you really want to honor their voice and for them to have an assumption that in this world, my voice matters. There was lots of bumps in the road, Sasha, as a parent. We talked and shared these stories. It wasn't always easy. You remember the parent meetings and some of the parents' oppositions to the ways in which we talked about police, for example.
Yeah.
What were some of your earliest experiences in that way of working with young children?
Well, close enough. All right. So I want to say that when I started with the Highlander School, I was a very anxious mother. I had a really challenging time conceiving, and then we lost a twin, and I just had a really rough pregnancy in general, and then a traumatic birth. So I didn't want to be away from my child, and I really resented the conditions that required us to be apart. And I was in the belly of the beast. I was in the advertising industry. So everything felt out of alignment. But the Highlander School felt safe. It was clear that Violet felt safe there. Violet loved it there. And I think that they had like a personal relationship with every single adult and child there. I loved the way that the Highlanders spoke about the rights of a child and how that felt very synergistic with the respectful parenting practices that we had been reading about and practicing at home. In practice, seeing the way that they lifted up the rights of a child and how that came through in their reflections way beyond like what they ate and how many diapers. It was really thoughtful observation, careful listening of dialogue and interactions. And it really illuminated the children's capacity to have these really complex dialogue that I didn't know that they were capable of, but was clearly proven to me on a daily basis. There was ongoing thread of conversations the whole year, I remember, on who is a member of our community. And it was so clear that the children really saw the more than human world as members of their community. We had a parent-teacher conference with Tori, and I will never forget her telling me that my 3-year-old is an activist, and how proud I was hearing that. I named my child's middle name is Rebel, so like I kind of like wrote it out, the expectation, but Violet was stated as an activist because they had gathered cohorts on the playground to stop traffic to save a worm from being run over. And when they were collecting acorns for a project, Violet called out like, no, we have to save some of the acorns for the squirrels because they're members of our community too, and we have to share. So there's something so spectacular about Tori specifically, but also just the educators and the environment at the Highlander School and the way that they really listen and lift up these small acts and see them as activism. We had a lot of powerful conversations at the Highlander School. I remember for the Dia de los Muertos altar, we had Breonna Taylor and George Floyd on there. And naturally, conversations happened at home and in the classroom about that. And some parents had called and were concerned about their kids' worry about police. And so a class meeting was called. And so in this classroom with parents of different socioeconomic backgrounds and different races, it was claimed, and it was stated clearly in that room that what is perceived as a tarnishing of innocence of white children is just a necessary conversation for Black and brown children. And we faced it together in that room. I would say that parenting has radicalized me. I would go further to say that being in relationship with Rukia and the Highlander School has further radicalized me, and I have been fundamentally changed. And grateful. I was going to share what my work has been with the Highlanders, or with the coalition. Wrong notes. So beyond supporting the logistics of our actions, my primary focus has been to establish our social media presence, to amplify the voices of young children, and to really counter the narrative of the city of Atlanta and of Mayor Dickens that it's only outside agitators that are against this project, which is completely false, and that there is a large growing support of, stopping Cop City right here locally in Atlanta. I'm a visual artist, and collaborating with my child is like my greatest joy. And so what that has looked like has been lots of art, poetry, banner making. Violet's lettering became a banner, it became a t-shirt, it became a bag. It's been really interesting to see how they have stepped into this role of activist through this work. At school, they were very nervous about a presentation that they were going to give when they were at the Morgan Oliver School. And when they finally got through it, they said that they felt tall and straight like a skyscraper, and they wanted to do it again. So I asked them if they would be interested in reading the poem that we had written together at one of our youth rallies. And they did, and they rose to the occasion, and again, tall and straight like a skyscraper. And then that led to City Hall. And so Violet has actually spoken at City Hall 3 times, giving public comment, and has probably spent a collective 17 hours there, and has stated they don't really want to ever go back. Otherwise, I've been working on trying to create materials for the coalition. I've created some zines, and I have these to share. We have The Kids of Weelaunee, which really chronicles the work that we've been doing thus far. And then the latest one is a collaboration with another parent in the coalition, Dr. Ariana Brazier, children's books for a reimagined world for children's books under the ages of 10 that you guys are welcome to have. And then we have links for those that are online. And then lastly, I just want to share the link if you click that. This is the poem that Violet and I wrote, and Violet has illustrated it.
This one.
Should you
The sound. Yeah.
With the sound? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Magic swirling all around.
Okay.
Bye bye. There is a magical forest, and it's magic swirling all around, with plants and mushrooms to learn about, animals, bugs, and discoveries to bound. The police don't like this forest. They want more power. They want to make us cower. Said no more playing here. The region's clear, the trees, and pioneer a city of fear. Friends of the forest said no. They came in droves. We gathered, played, and planted. Some friends even made the forest their home. This made the police angry. They attacked the forest time and time again. Then a loved one was killed when Rail tried to keep their payas to Rem. We've occupied, called in, and marched, wrote letters and shouted in the streets. Don't cut down the trees. Mayor Dickens, listen to what we really need. Solidarity and awareness growing. More friends coming and going. To defend the Atlanta forest. No Cop City here or anywhere. Please save Weelaunee. Stop Cop City. Save Weelaunee.
Thank you. Pretty proud of that. So now I am doing, we're doing an experimental year of unschooling. unable to afford private school anymore, and unwilling to engage in public schooling with school shootings and active shooter drills and police in schools and book bans and don't say gay and testing and developmentally inappropriate access to movement, play, and the outdoors. Not interested in raising an obedient worker. So my child is now sleeping until their body is ready, thriving, led by their interests in a rhythm outside of the capitalist machine. And we've learned that we need less things. We just need each other.
Okay, so I guess that leaves me. I am, it's an honor to follow these two voices and to be on a panel with them because they do the hard work every day in classrooms and with their own children. And I am just going to back it up with some science. So just to show you that what they're doing does actually have some research to prove that it is, to prove or to document that it is helpful to children. And just two reflections that I wanted to just say before I get started, because I think it is a great entryways. You asked, what is the purpose of education? And in my mind, education asks you to change, which is why you pursue it. And then also the image of the child. What is your image of the child? Is it as a strong and powerful human being? Or is it someone that needs constant protection and needs to be preserved in terms of an innocence? So those two things keep in mind. So I'm going to show you these two couple of infographics. And this one is like the Children's Community School in Philadelphia created this. And it's specifically about race and children's perception of race when they're very young. But you really could, race is just one example of the social justice issues that it could apply to. And what you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can remember this because it's pretty tiny, but at birth, children do not have a preference for any particular racial image on faces. But by 3 months, they prefer the racial match to their caregiver. So they're already showing that they are recognizing and having a preference for different races. By 30 months, which is under 3 years old, they use race to choose playmates. By 4, they use expressions of prejudice. And by 5, what some research shows is that Black and Latinx children show no preference for playmates, but white children do, and they prefer to play with other white children. So definitely a bias in front of whiteness. But the good news is by the time children are 5 and 7, we have research that shows that if adults have explicit conversations with children to explain some of these things about interracial friendships and interrace relations, that within 1 week, children's racial attitudes changed for the better, that they were more open to other playmates. So just one example of what are some of the social justice issues that you can address with very young children. But really, as Rakia said, it's about empathy and kindness, which is kind of how it extends to lots of different areas. Sorry, I'm a hand talker. So one of the things that, and Rakia mentioned this too, is people think, well, aren't they too young? Is this appropriate for young children? And again, that speaks to the image of the child. But the next slide is going to answer a little bit of that, is what is really too young and what is really happening with very young children in terms of brain development. So this slide kind of helps me think about how doing nothing is teaching something. So if you look at the blue line, it refers to the brain's plasticity or the brain's ability to change. And at the orange line represents the amount of effort it takes for the brain to change. So what I like to refer to this gap in between the blue line and the orange line at age 2, I like to call that an open window, because it doesn't take a lot of effort for the brain to change, and it is very able to change at 2 years old. But as children grow, you can see that even if you get to 10 years old, that open window starts to close a little bit. It's never completely closed, but the way I explain it to my students is that that open window now has a little screen and maybe some shutters and blinds and a shade. There's still some entryways, but it's a lot more difficult when they are 30 years old than when they're 2. So if we want to teach them about empathy and kindness, the time to start is early childhood. And we do know that babies are born and they do cry. If you've worked in an infant room, you know that babies do cry in response to hearing another baby cry, which is an indication that we are kind of born with some empathy. But we also know that as children grow older, they are going to start to show some preferences for people who are like them. And so how do we address that with young children? We do the explicit instruction, which is what Rakia talked about. If the adults in their lives let them know that this is really important, that you really hurt her and that's not acceptable, and you need to go and make reparations for that hurt, you need to go get a Band-Aid or an ice pack, or help them build the building back up again, or whatever it is, that teaches the children, and they are very able to learn it, as the children at the Highlander School have proven. They can do it and they can learn it. And of course, you're going to teach it in developmentally appropriate ways. And actually, if you go to the next slide, it is about, as Rakia mentioned, starting with you and why do you want to do this? Are you ready to do this? What are the values that you want to teach the child? Whether you're a parent or a teacher, it's important to have that conversation or that reflection with yourself. Think about, what are the things I want to start with? What is important to me that my child grow up with? And in early childhood, we actually, we have had, since 1989, we have had the anti-bias curriculum, and I am actually old enough to remember when this book came out. And it was very exciting because it now is that we've been grappling with this for so many years. But as early childhood educators, people who work with the youngest educators, I kind of like to think of us as the pioneers in this area. We have been thinking about these things for a very long time. Not that we've, accomplished a lot. There are very few schools like the Highlander School, but the framework is there. And the goals include things like identity, helping children to recognize their own identity and be appreciative of their own identity. That they do have an ethnicity, which a lot of my white students will say, well, I'm just normal. I don't have any culture. Helping people to recognize that they do have an identity and they do have a culture. Recognizing diversity, that there are lots of different kinds of people in the world. And then recognizing unfairness and injustice. And then finally, activism. And this activism is kind of the level where, not that they're levels, but it's kind of the place in the framework where the Highlander School is, because they've been doing these hard preliminary work for a very long time. If you want to start, you can start with your own identity. You can start small, thinking about what are the values that I want children to learn, and just believing that children can handle it if it's done in an appropriate way. Go to the next slide. So thinking about starting with something you're ready to do. These are just really small little changes that you could do, whether you're in a classroom or whether you're at home. Providing honest, truthful information in small doses, especially depending on the age of the child. One of the, I wish I could remember who it is because I would give her credit, but I can't. This is not my idea, but her idea is that what you're telling children about these things should not last longer in one dose than it takes to sing Baby Shark. So if you think about how long that song, it's a small little thing, but children can handle it better in these small little doses. And then you build on it the next time. You sing the next verse. Or using the phrase, I'm not sure, let's find out more. And then going and digging deeper. Sharing your values and providing the direct instruction. It's really important to teach it. Saying nothing or doing nothing is teaching something. That's really important to remember. So, next one. And then I'm trying to get back to Rakia.
I want to just piggyback off of what you both said, because you talked about this, how elastic a brain is. And I think often when we talk of movement work, we're thinking with college students, how can we get them organized? How can we get the adults organized? How can we go out and give information to other folks? And I really want to just keep emphasizing, because as a society, we haven't committed ourselves to young children. We have not committed ourselves to young children and families. We do not have the maternity leave, the paternity leave that families deserve. Children do not have access to the care that they deserve. Or for us to really rethink that, because in schools of Reggio Emilia that are inspiring to us, it's a whole community that supported these schools that are gorgeous and anti-fascist, but the municipality pays for it. And so really thinking about, again, that curve and how open a young child's heart is and how their mind is and how much they can learn in such a quick time. So if you don't take anything away from that, again, I hope just this image of the time of our child and thinking it, again, our greatest link to our ancestors and our own potential in terms of humanity, I think is one way to consider it. One of the things that's bothered me so much in watching what's happening in Gaza, this is the children. This is children. So again, it's been an honor to have this moment that we've offered a lot, and we want to kind of open up a segue into hearing your own voices, because I think this is where you really build knowledge and build community. It's in the exchange. And so these are some prompts. You may have your own questions that you're lingering within your mind. But just to get us started of like, what is speaking to your heart and mind by the story of what was offered from Sasha, what was offered from Linda? And again, what lingering questions do you have? ER might have a question. And again, if you raise your hand and can take the mic, that would be really helpful to us.
Hello. So beautiful hearing y'all speak. I think in conversations like this, I think a lot about children who are in public schools, who, just like children at the Highlander School, like are people with autonomy, with the ability to do like action, like y'all in the street in collaboration with people outside of your group, even like very beautiful. And what y'all are talking about, you know, with book bannings and other types of violence to thieve education from children and access, like there's so much bureaucracy because it's, you know, it's clear, there's data, like you're saying, you know, the power of these people. So for educators working within those institutions, what is y'all's advice for conversations with the parents, or trying to maybe like circumvent or at least kind of work within those frameworks to introduce all of this stuff in places like public school or like on online platforms with a lot of bureaucracy, et cetera?
I don't know that I have the answer, because I understand that public school is a different institution from a private early learning center. But my advice just off the top of my head would be to find your allies. We had a beautiful meeting last week with educators from all over the metro area who were, I mean, all the way from early infant teachers on up to high school and college. And they all were asking the same questions. And I think there's strength in numbers and in each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts of that. I do recognize that I have a lot of privilege in a sense of flexibility, and it's been intentional that and how we get funded, you know, really stirred away from getting public funding, because that would mean I would have to adhere to different guidelines and so forth. And in the conversations with other educators and so forth, I think one of the things just from outset that's needed is more political power and support from the community. A lot of the standards and so forth are made not by teachers and educators, but by politicians. So whether you're talking about a teacher who was fired in Cobb County or the book that she chose to read, we also need to support them to be able to do the work that they are doing. There have been the people who are banning these books have been working for years to get this work done. So how are we going to organize ourselves The rules, the standards, all of those are created by politicians to say, okay, in kindergarten, you have to talk about Christopher Columbus and so forth. So they need the political power. In the state of Georgia, for example, they cannot organize. They could do so. We're trying to work through this Educators to Stop Cop Cities to support all teachers, including public school teachers, to organize themselves and be able to hold power. That's one way that I think we're trying to be in community. And then also other tangible ways in which you can talk about this and build it in a curriculum in a way that's not as obvious. Like there are colleagues who, for example, talk about Christopher Columbus and stolen land, and it may be in the context of a sea lion that wants to take the home of a sea turtle. And what do you guys think of that? So there are other strategies of using materials and different mediums and storytellings in which you can get some of this information through. And there's educators who want to specifically talk about Stop Cop City, and it may be for the meantime them not being able to name it. I think there are small ways in which teachers, educators, we all make choices of how we're going to disrupt. And it may not be, they may not have as expansive leverage because they don't have the political power within a place like Atlanta versus a teacher in a public school, let's say in San Francisco, from the community. We have to be in community. I don't know if you have more thoughts.
I really think it comes down to having like more like base building individual conversations. It's got to be networking and
And families.
Yeah.
When all of my families go to public school settings, and we've seen a difference, for example, in Burgess Peterson, I would go and visit with them and say, you need to advocate what you want, the foods that you want, the curriculum that they want. I mean, of course, Burgess Peterson is a public school, but they do have a garden. They had a studio space. So even families going up and organizing, the schools in Reggio Emilia, again, didn't come from educators. They actually came from the families demanding that this is what we want for our community. But we often, again, don't hold it as a priority in our culture in terms of young children. We just want them, can they spell their name? Can they count? And so we have to do that internal revolution of even recognizing, whoa, we're upholding the oppression. So I think having those conversations, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts about the question.
I just want to offer, just from the book side of things, 11 all women actually were responsible for thousands of book bans in the country. 11. So I think sometimes us on the left, because of our values of diversity and sort of multiplicity and all of that, we're like, I'm not going to impose my values on you. I just want my kid to be okay, or I want my community to be okay. I think it's worth considering, like what Rakia is saying, we need to step up a little bit more in encouraging our values in public spaces, right? Because I think sometimes we can be like, oh no, I don't want to impose that, even if other people are imposing literally fascist values onto a shared space. I think we're so reluctant to do that sometimes we overcorrect and step out of the shared public sphere. And that allows a power vacuum where then these folks are coming in. And it's literally such a minority of people, even on the right, who desire this. Like even the broadly people on the right don't desire book bans. This is a minority of people in this country who are doing the vast majority of this. But we've ceded a ton of power to this tiny fringe group. And the other thing I will say, to speak to what you're saying about sort of the subtlety of maybe we teach about Christopher Columbus with sea lions, right? Is the books that are banned, they're not reading these books. They're reading the titles of the books and they're reading the back covers. So we can be very creative with metaphors, right? And with all the way, if they're not going to read them, as long as, Genderqueer was one of the most banned books. And the author was on a panel at the American Booksellers Association, and the person interviewing them said, well, why is your book so banned? What's so bad about it? And they said, no, it's because it's got the word gender queer in it. And if you Google that, that's the thing that comes up over and over again if you Google either of those terms and if you Google them together. And so I think we need to think in a more simplistic way about what is going to raise red flags, and then just sort of limbo underneath those red flags and teach in a more metaphorical and creative way. Got time for like one more question? Anybody? No?
I don't want to take up the last question. I love you guys. I'm proud to know you and organize with you. I feel like this is what I've been feeling, but I think it's what a lot of us have been feeling. I've been feeling such an overwhelming sense of grief and despair about what's happening, not just here in Atlanta, but around the world and Palestine and the Congo and Sudan, and a sense of helplessness. And I really admire your willingness to like support children in grappling with those feelings, and instead of shielding them from the sadness that we feel, sharing like the truth with them and allowing them to process that sadness too. And so I wanted to ask how you support children through grief and through mourning and through sadness, and yeah, what you've done to honor the lives lost.
Whew. I have a couple minutes. Again, thinking about the ways in which we've evolved and shifted our image of the children and the child. And I'm going to be really quick because I know we're short on time, but it takes me to the story of how we celebrated the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And some of you have heard this story and some of you have not. But when we first opened the school, we had a very generic way of celebrating his life. We made a friendship soup and talked about the ways in which he wanted us all to play together. And, it was all really sweet and all that other kind of stuff. And then one day my grandmother, her friend walked in the room and the kids were so excited. They were like, Dr. King, oh my God, Dr. King. And we were like, oh shit, we didn't say he died. Like, and it was like this gap. And so remember, Quinn was like, oh, I'm not Dr. King, And the child was like, well, are you Jesus? And so he was like, no, we're honored. And we kind of like, we never told the children that he was assassinated or murdered or died. And it was a place early on, I think it was 2014. Again, we were questioning our image of the child. And it became a metaphor because Quinn would walk through the neighborhood and every poster of a Black man she would see, she would say, well, is that Dr. King? That Dr. King? And it became, again, a metaphor for conversations we were choosing to have with children and ones we were not having. A child, before we had the opportunity, came and said, it's so sad. Like, he was shot in the head and he died and he went back to nature. And we were like, whoa, but the kids handled it, really well. And in our community walks on flat shows, there's a funeral home. And so we began to talk to the children about what happens to your body when you go back to nature and how it's cleansed and so forth. And they would see like a hawk taking up a rat and they would see it. So that cycle of life for children, they actually handle it a lot better than we do. They see it as like, oh, so-and-so passed away. We need to lay flowers for them. We need to lay, it's I would say more concrete for them, if that makes any sense. They don't necessarily understand all these other political dynamics that are taking place, but someone we loved has gone back to nature. And then we do things like celebrating the Day of the Dead, which has been profound because it's also us reclaiming Indigenous and African values that have been lost. So in other cultures, you don't talk about death. And here we're talking about our ancestors are with us. So on our altar, they bring in their ancestors and talk about their favorite things, but then we also bring in images of people who've been harmed by the state. Sasha mentioned Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, but we've had Tamir Rice. When Johnny Hallman was passed away, many of you know he was killed by the police. We immediately put a picture of them and created an altar. So the children are focused more on honoring that life lived. I think it impacts adults in a different way. I don't know if that's
using the term concrete is because very young children are concrete thinkers. They need to see it, feel it, touch it, taste it, hear it to understand it. So ways that Rikia mentioned in terms of like doing an action to help them understand it, talking about going back to nature, which they obviously, at least at the Highlander, they understand what nature is. making it concrete, telling the truth that there are a lot of things we don't know about what happens when you die, and just then sharing your own spiritual belief or whatever, but not shielding them from it or not lying about it, which I think is a lot of times what happens because we're just thinking we have to protect them. Yeah.
I'll just share that an exercise that we did at home is having conversations about what makes us feel safe. And Violet did lots of drawings about the things that make them feel safe. And then we talked about the things that don't make them feel safe and align that with the experiences of the children in Gaza and the wishes that we have for all children.
So I would love for us to offer another round of applause and thank you. For folks who don't know, Rikia has a book coming out next year, which we will be celebrating for sure when it comes out, March 2024. So stay tuned for that. We've not yet locked it down, but we're going to lock it down to celebrate it because that's a very important contribution to this field, and we're really excited to get to celebrate with you. I don't know if anybody wants to shout out any other actions that are happening this week. We are about to have community art making with Noah and Barry. You can stay and make signs. You can stay and make art of any kind, grief art, anything like that. Say it again.
Come hang out with us.
Come hang out. Stay and hang out. But does anybody want to share? Obviously, there's a big action that's happening tomorrow. Does anybody want to share anything before we go with the community? Yes, be safe tomorrow. We're going to say goodbye to our virtual friends. Thank you for being with us on this Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon. We appreciate you.